I put this book together over about the last couple of years, and basically I was encouraged to do it by Cass Business School, who said to me, "You've got all these business stories. Why don't you put them together, and we'll help you do that?" So that's basically what I did. So I didn't really start out to intend to sell a lot of books, although of course that would be nice. But it sort of dawned on me as I went through the process that, in fact, an awful lot of the businesses that I was involved in, that I'd invested in, could really benefit from perhaps a fresh look at how they were performing, what they were doing, the information that they were taking. So I came up with the idea of calling it the Monday Revolution, because I'd spent a lot of time with companies looking at plans and strategies, and I'd read a lot of business books, and along the way it seemed to me that there was an awful lot of theory that one could take on board, but not a lot of practical stuff that you could grab hold of and you could start really using at the beginning of your working week. So what we're going to talk about today is just a few examples of things that you can grab hold of and start to do really from today, from Monday, yesterday. In fact, I mean, within the book, there are over 100 action points, and they sit at the end of each of the chapters, and you should be able to take them and apply them to your business, whether you're a big business or a small business, and that's really the idea behind it. It allows you, I think, to be able to take back control, and the critical test for me, really, and maybe for you too, is how do you feel about the week ahead? And within the book, there's quite a few sort of quick fixes, and I think that the context of the current situation that we find ourselves in really gives us an opportunity to stand back and sort of press the reset button. I mean, clearly it's a very difficult time for lots of different companies and businesses and families. There's no getting away from that. But I think on a more positive front, it gives us the opportunity to and gives us a permission and gives us a little bit of space and provides the air cover for us to make the sort of changes perhaps that would have taken much longer. And the organizations that I'm talking to are sort of saying to me, well, you know, what does the new normal look like? How do we get back to where we were? But in fact, quite a few of them now are saying, actually, we don't want to get back to where we were. We want to get back to part of it, but this is an opportunity to change. And the quote that Alex has just put up there, I think, you know, it's pretty well known, but it does really sum it up. What can we do, really? It's about survival, of course, but then it's about moving forward. And so what I'd like to do now, before we go on to questions, is just to give you one or two examples of the sorts of things that I've been thinking of, and the type of things that I put into practice, which may be helpful for some of you. So the first one is about leadership and being visible. And in my experience of lots of companies, they're pretty good at good news and not so good at bad news. And if we're not careful, we watch a gap between leadership and management and the people that are actually operating on the front line. And often that gap is filled by supposition, because people say, well, I don't think there's any real need to say anything because everybody really knows what's going on. And interestingly, I find this often in smaller and medium-sized businesses than I do in larger ones, because larger businesses tend to have processes. I mean, sometimes they're quite wooden, and they may be perhaps talking in platitudes or whatever, but there tends to be a communication process in place. Whereas in smaller groups, often there isn't. And I don't think, in all my experience, I've ever worked in a company where someone said the management communicate with us too much. There's too much communication. Never happens. And here's one example of a business that I was involved in, and the thing that we used to do there. And we invented a thing called the horse's mouth. And basically, we encouraged our senior managers, all the leaders of the company, to regularly talk to the people within our company. And it was a challenge because we were located in lots and lots of different places. And so we put together a regular structure of communication. We didn't just wait until we had something to say. We asked people what it was they wanted to know. And the reason we called it the horse's mouth was quite simple, that we wanted people to believe what they'd heard. So this wasn't a sort of game of Chinese whispers, whereas someone sits in a boardroom and tells their management team, and the management team interpret it and take it down the line until it gets reinterpreted. So we wanted the senior people within the organization to take responsibility of communication. We called it the horse's mouth, and it worked really well for us. And I think that works well in a company, big or small. The second point I'd like to move on to is one of cash flow. And I know if you search cash flow at the moment, you know, there's a lot of companies out there will talk about cash flow, and not surprisingly. So what do I think the most immediate result will be? The learnings from the current situation, companies will keep more cash. If you go and talk to an independent financial advisor, they tend to have a piece of advice that says to you, as an individual, you should always keep 6 months' money in cash, just in case things go wrong. You're too ill to work, you lose your job, you need to have that operating expense, okay, on hand. But lots of companies don't do that. Lots of companies can't afford to do that. Debt's been very cheap. So we found a situation very quickly where working capital for lots of companies is really in very short supply. And I think that what will change now is that companies will take a more prudent view of that as a result of where we find ourselves today. One quick story about that was I was helping a company a couple of years ago, and it was a sales-driven organization. By that, I mean the people that have built the business were all salespeople. And so not surprisingly, we used to concentrate a lot on the top line. And it took the finance director, who perhaps didn't have the voice at the table he should have done, to speak up at one of the meetings I was at to say that every sale the company was making was actually costing it cash, because their pricing had gone haywire. They were discounting when they shouldn't have been, and the company was slowly bleeding to death because it was losing cash out of it. And by contrast, there's another company that I worked with, and they have a daily cash flow tracker. And I think it's the responsibility of everybody in an organization who has a management role to understand where the cash flow is in the business. And lots of people don't want to do that. It's not that exciting. They want to give it to somebody else. They want to make sure the finance director's on it. I think everyone needs to take responsibility for the company cash. And if ever there was a lesson to come out of where we are today, that is it. The next thing I'd like to move on to basically is data. And one of the things I find going out and talking to organizations is they've basically got too much of it. And part of the challenge these days, of course, is that everybody shares the same data. So it's not just how much you've got, it's what you do with it. And my challenge to everybody is, well, what are you doing with it? And how are you managing it? How are you organizing it? What are you learning from it? And really, I think most of us could do with doing an audit on data, because it tends to breed. And so you end up with pitch decks that start out at 10 slides and they end up with 30 because you just keep adding to them. You look at management reports and KPIs, and there's already too many of them. So I think one should use this current opportunity to spring clean your data. How much information do you really need to run your business, and be ruthless with it and cut it all out, because I bet you've got too much of it. The next thing I'd like to move on to is is one about business models. And really the only thing I've got to say here is that if you're in a business that's operating on a project basis, in other words, you're winning contracts, they're lasting for a fixed period of time, you've then got to go out and win more contracts. There are several businesses that I've worked with who used to do that, and they've managed to transition their models into one of regular repeated income. And they've done that by changing their business models from a project model into a subscription model. And these are both business to business and business to consumer. Two of them are tech businesses, and one is a food business. So really my suggestion there is, if you're in the project business, have a look and see what you could do. What could you supply your customers with, which will provide you with a regular, sustainable income? It's a much better quality of earnings. And if you're one of those organizations who's looking to sell your company at some point, you'll get a much better price for it because the quality of earnings is much better. The next thing I was going to talk about is how you manage time. And I think my only suggestion here is most people complain they're too busy. Most people look in their calendars on a Sunday evening and wonder how a lot of that stuff got there. It's a bit like double physics when you didn't enjoy it. You don't sort of enjoy it, you endure it. And in my role of trying to help organizations, often the first thing I'll do is look in the calendar of the person I'm trying to help. And usually you can free up 30 to 40% of time simply by encouraging people to look at how they're spending their time. And actually they realize you don't need an internal meeting. You don't need an external meeting. You don't need 7 people in a room. You can deal with a lot of its stuff a lot more quickly. And when I often ask people why they're going to meetings or what the purpose of the meeting is, they can't really tell me.
I like that, David. Getting another pair of eyes on your calendar, that could be key, I think.
And then finally, and then we'll do Q&A. And then finally, I'm very keen on evidence-based behaviour and evidence-based management. And the question I tend to ask here is, how do you really know? And I'll just give you one quick example of evidence. And usually it's when people hire people, and then perhaps they don't work out, and people say, well, how did that happen? And often the answer is because the decision was made without any real supporting evidence. We followed our instinct, we followed our intuition. The person that we talked to, they had a nice smile, a friendly demeanor, they said things that sounded right. They'd worked at a big company and we're a bit smaller. We were flattered they were there. We hired them, and we didn't really get the evidence we needed to know that their behavior and skills was going to fit the job that we had, and they didn't work out as well as they should. And so I think with lots of decision making in business, you need to ask that question before you push the button. How do we really know? Okay, that's a sort of flavor of what my book's about. I've still got a wonderful echo on the line, Alex. I'm not going to blame you, but I will blame you.
It's all good this end. I can't hear an echo, but hopefully, yeah. So it'll be all right in the recording as well. So I'm just going to open the screen up now. Be interesting once we do come out of lockdown, going back to like the slide number 9, you talked about organization and meetings, and I like that idea of, you know, getting another pair of eyeballs on your calendar, because you can almost see a gold rush of people wanting to start schedule face-to-face meetings, and the amount of extra time those take up than what, you know, we're doing now and what most people have been doing, which is, you know, via Zoom or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so loads and loads of questions here, and people telling us where they're from and what they do, which is awesome. So I'm going to go straight to Umesh. He's talking about the hospitality industry here. He says, what innovative and new things will the hospitality industry need to try to stimulate consumer demand again, but also to increase revenues?
Well, that's a big one. That's a
big question.
I'm usually the recipient of the hospitality industry as opposed to being the marketing of it. I mean, clearly there are a huge amount of unknowns in terms of what we're going to be allowed to do and not allowed to do. What I would encourage people to do at the moment is to stay in touch with their customers. I mean, at the end of the day, the hospitality industry it's a marketing tool, and it's a very valuable marketing tool. And for networking, for entertaining, for rewarding, it's absolutely key. And I don't think it's a nice to have. I think it's essential for lots of different ways. I mean, there's a lot of stuff being done online at the moment. But I think the message I would say to the hospitality industry is look at how you can make your offering, your products that you're selling people relevant at the moment, and stay in touch very much with your customer base. And as a general point, I think this is a great time for exploring new customer contacts, for thinking about what people might be interested in. Lots of businesses are already talking about what they're going to be doing next year, and I think now's the time to be engaging with them. And I think the bit of advice I give you is, if you've got stuff in the past that's worked, then that's fine, but it may not be good enough for the future. So be innovative, brainstorm with your people, steal ideas. I've always done that. Steal ideas from other people, see what other people are doing and thinking, yeah, that looks great, let's go and do that.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just having that conversation with my wife, who's a beauty therapist. Well, she had beauty salon owner, and she had to obviously shut her salon down when this happened. And I was thinking, you know, what you should be doing right now is exactly what you said, which is getting back in touch with those customers who you are going to see again. And if you know, amount of commentary I've seen on social media from females who cannot wait to go back to a hair salon, a beauty salon, you name it. I think they're going to be all rushed off their feet when the lockdown does come down. But in the meantime, I think you need to be doing stuff to remain at the forefront of people's minds, so that when things do open up, you're the first person that they think of. Let's have a quick look here. David from Martin, have you got any specific advice on how a project fee service business can move to a subscriber model? Martin from the Propeller Group.
Ah, Martin, hello. Yes, I have. I think that you need to find a regular flow of valuable information that you can supply people, and I think that you can charge them regularly for that. And that may sound simplistic, but I know you know how to do that. So I think you should find some information. And one of the things that tends to work quite well is, don't try and be too greedy at once. There are businesses that I've worked with that were supplying services and information, and what they did was they had a very low level pricing, and I think that that's really helpful, because it means the decision within an organization can be made at a much lower level. So, for example, a company I worked with, they decided that their information model, their intelligence model, where they could help companies find new customers, that they would pitch it at somebody in the company who needed that information and could buy it on a company credit card without having to go ask anybody. And that was what they did. And then they sold extra services on the back of it. I mean, we all know these models because we're all aware of them. We get them pitched at us all the time. But it does work. I mean, and that's the reason why.
Thanks, David. Anna says, strong and straight up business advice, very refreshing. Neil from Hampshire, Neil Blackley says, hi, I've bought David's book. Look forward to reading it.
Thanks, Neil.
So Justine says, I've been trying to do more online events for ages, and now because I have to, I am doing it. Yes, David has got me to go off reliance on sponsorship and focus on subscriptions. He once told me not to make meetings on Mondays and Fridays, and then you've always got room in your diary for emergency meetings, and also have days to do actual work on. I like that. Otherwise, the whole week's just filled up, isn't it? And you've got no capacity then. Let's have a quick look. Freddie, hi there, thanks. Question, if using this opportunity to start something new, David, how would you give your new company reputation in order to provide new clients with confidence in your service? And this is a new office cleaning business.
Right. How? Just say that again, Alex.
Yeah, I'm just rereading it as well. How do you give your new company a reputation in order to provide new clients with confidence in your service because you're new? Okay.
Right. Okay. So when the new client says, have you got any references? And you have to go, well, no, you're my first client. So yeah. No. So no one can say whether we're any good or not. Yeah. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
Sounds like it is. Yeah. Okay. How do you build a reputation? Well, this is a sort of common question for lots of businesses, really, because when you go to the sort of sales school, they say to you, well, give us some case studies. But of course, you can't start with case studies. So I think it tracks back to how you get your first customers. And in my experience of getting customers that are going to say good things about you, you need introductions and you need referrals. So you need to start off with somebody who's on sort of friendly ground. Okay. And I'll tell you a very quick story of somebody where we had no reputation, no one knew us. We turned up, a friend of mine turned up in New York to start a business. He didn't know anybody. He'd never been to New York. Okay. And he needed to build a customer base. And so if you ask him now, what's the best way of getting customers? He'd say it's by referral. And I said to him, but you didn't know anybody. So how did that work? And he said, yeah, but I knew lots of people in the UK and they knew people in America. And the people they introduced me to in America weren't the right people, but they introduced me to people who were the right people. And that guy now has built a multi-million pound business from knowing nobody. So I think if you're starting a new business, then you need to think about who's in your network. So what companies could you go and work for? What companies would trial you? And therefore, what companies would be in a position to say something good about you? And you really don't need too many. But it's by referral. Think about your network. And if you haven't got a network, think about how you should build it. The best way of building any business from the floor up is by meeting people who can introduce you to future customers.
Very good. Thank you, David. Justine says, David is a business genius. He's helped me publish my publishing network. Next one. So Maribel, welcome international students under 18 every summer, and they stay in host families. We offer an experience, so teaching online is not an option.
I've lost you, Alex. Can anybody hear me? Because I've seemed to have lost Alex at my end. Can anybody in the feed just say yes? We can see you or hear you, David. Oh, great! Thank you very much for that. Okay, so it's Alex that we lost. So I think Alex was asking me a question about Mirabelle, which I can see in the feed. We offer an experience, so teaching online is not an option. It will work for us. It's going to be very hard to change the business model. Well, absolutely, it is going to be different. But if that isn't an opportunity, you need to find. Obviously, you need to find an opportunity, because if that isn't available to you, you're going to have to do something else. But I guess you know that. Yeah, I'm just looking at the questions. Right. Okay. All right. I've got a question here from Matt Phillips down at the bottom. It says, when spring cleaning data is recommended, what do you we concentrate on? Okay. Well, I think the data and KPIs really need to be a function of what it is you need to run your business. So the first thing I would say, okay, what do we need? So if you know that your business is driven by live sales calls or conversions or pricing, probably all those things, then I would start with those. So what do you really need? So if you could have, say, 5 KPIs to run your business, what would they be, and how are you using them? And I would start with the most important, and avoid that situation where you have things because they're interesting. And often data builds up because somebody around a meeting table said, wouldn't it be interesting if we looked at this, or if we looked at that? And it might well be interesting, but it doesn't really serve any purpose. So I think you need to look at what are the most important levers for your business, and measure those, and then everything else is either a luxury or a distraction. Right. What effect will the new normal have on client engagement and retention, and what challenges are needed? Client engagement. That's a big general question. And I don't think I can give a sort of off the head response to that easily. I think the things that are going to be important to clients are the same things that always were, and perhaps if certain lessons would come out of the current situation, we ought to value current clients more than we do. And I think that often in the chase for new business, new contracts and new clients, we don't perhaps look after our current clients as well as we should. And the cost of acquisition for a new client is often very high. And there are situations that I encounter, particularly in professional services, where a company will spend 2 or 3 years following a client, waiting for them to review their accounts. And then the company that I know gets on the pitch list, and they pitch for the business and they win it. And that's very, very exciting. But then after a period of time, they're on to the next thing. And the client, who was also excited to having employed this new supplier, becomes disillusioned. And suddenly they start looking about how expensive it is. And then they start to look around. So I would encourage everybody to look at their current client base, look at how you're looking after those clients, and look at how you can supply them with more value. And secondly, look at what else you could offer them, which is back to the point that we made a few moments ago. But I think the basic principles are always going to apply. You need to look after your business, look after your clients, and not just be led by the thrill of the chase for bringing in new ones. Right, one here from Gareth. Hi, Gareth. Since the time, perfect moment to put in place working standards, procedures, minimum standards, team building. Yes, I would. So you're saying here, we pay by commission and it's very generous. Right. Okay. What do we mean by generous? I mean, if you're just paying against sales performance, that sounds quite good, because the cost is directly related to the income that's coming in. Mostly people complain about salespeople because they've got a high salary and they don't always hit their targets. I think it's a blend. If you want to hire good salespeople, you need both. You need realistic targets. I think companies sometimes obsess with commissions and they worry so much about soft targets and overpaying that actually what they put in front of people means they're out of reach, and therefore it's demotivating. But I think that the basic rules on sales are, if you want to have loyalty, if you want to have people to take responsibility, then pay a fair, regular salary, agree with them what the targets should look like. Don't be obsessed with setting them high, and incentivize them to overachieve. There's lots of basic rules about that. I mean, for example, I'm not a fan at all about awarding bonuses. I try and discourage companies from doing that. I think it's all about performance related pay. And if you say, well, we wouldn't know how to award that person a performance related pay, you might ask yourself why you've employed them. Because if you don't know how they're supposed to perform, then why are they there?
Hi, David, back with you.
Alex?
Virgin Media was down all last night, so
yeah, I saw that.
Is what it is, isn't it? Yeah, it's quite regular. Question, getting some questions coming up on the private tab here. I've got a whole bunch of them, so I will go through them. But while I bring those up, obviously you haven't got a crystal ball, but what's your personal thoughts on changes in consumer and business behaviour once we come out of lockdown?
I think if you go back to other sort of serious critical moments in business, and the last one was the financial crisis of 10 years ago. And what happened then? Well, what happened then was the banks basically became far more prudent in terms of who they would lend to when we came out of it. And that hasn't changed that much in a way. So banks have got far tougher criteria about who they'll lend to, which is causing problems now. But that came out of the financial crisis. And equally, banks have to hold far more cash on their balance sheets, a bit like we were saying earlier, to make sure that if things go wrong, they don't fall over, which is what happened last time. So what's likely to happen? Well, we've seen all sorts of predictions, and some of them will happen and some of them won't. I think a large part of business and people just want to get back to normal. They just want to go and do what they see as normal things.
Yeah.
But I think on the other hand, people obviously have discovered things. I mean, I work with a food business. It's an online food business, and their uptake in sales has been dramatic. I mean, absolutely dramatic, because there's a requirement there. And of course, the question that we ask ourselves in that business is, how many of those customers will remain? You know, some will go back to Tesco's and Waitrose. Others will have discovered products of much better quality that they didn't really realize existed. Some of them will have discovered the benefits of home delivery, and someone won't. So I think the shifts in change will be very dependent on individual circumstances. But I think that what is happening is that companies are using this air cover as opportunity to make changes that would have taken years, and now they can do it. And that's what will happen. I mean, I noticed on my Sky newsfeed at lunchtime, Marks and Spencer today have said, we're changing our business model. I mean, and probably what would have taken, discussions with staff and maybe unions and everything else, they're going, no, not now. We're going to do it this way. And I think there will be a lot of businesses that will become better businesses, which is going to be better for the consumer as a result of this. But I think a lot of it will go back to where it was. But that doesn't detract from a lot of the problems that were already there. I mean, the high street won't go back for many businesses. I mean, it just won't. It was already in lots of trouble. And those companies that hadn't transitioned to go online, that hadn't got regular repeat revenues, I mean, and they don't sell things that anyone really needs, they're in trouble.
Yeah, interesting. Primark, for example, only offline, aren't they? High street. Yep. And I was messaging my friend who's a director on the board there, and I was just saying, you're using this time to get your kids to build a website for the company or something, because you need an e-commerce store pretty sharpish. Still waiting for an answer on that one, but you'd imagine it'd be doing something like that. And
well, there's a lot of businesses like that, Alex.
Really?
A company I work with, we had a couple of approaches in the last week, and these are businesses that are retail businesses without any online presence, and they've talked about it, and they've toyed with it, and they played around with it, but suddenly their retail business is shut down. It's not there, and they're now coming out to companies that they've discovered and said, "Could we partner with you?" I think we'll see more. I think we'll see more of that.
Yeah, and I did wonder, like, when this happened, and you looked at what's been happening to the high street progressively, and you thought, will people use this opportunity to re-envisage the whole experience of the high street? But it's probably not been enough time, has it, for a lot of these organisations, like you say, that are so big and unwieldy to make those changes? That's what's probably surprising with Marks and Spencer's to a certain degree.
Well, I remember 20 years ago when people said, you'll never buy clothes online because people need to touch clothes. They need to try them on. It's part of the experience. Online clothing is a non-event. And Primark obviously stuck with that, whereas ASOS and Boohoo didn't.
Yeah.
We know who's doing well.
Unbelievable, aren't they? Yeah. A few more questions. Don't know if you answered any of these before. Data. When spring cleaning data as recommended, what do you suggest we concentrate on? Tests.
When spring cleaning data. Oh, yeah, and I've answered that.
Okay. Some of these might have been duplicated by people. Justine's just said she's doing so much more online. I should have done it years ago. I was wasting time going to too many meetings. Meeting over Zoom saves time. COVID has had a positive effect on my business and my time. Good. Amanda says, as an independent gallery with one-off art and ceramics, we have an online presence which we need to supercharge.
Yep.
Over to you, David. Any suggestions?
You need a supercharge. Yeah. Okay.
So
get someone who knows what they're doing. Would be, if that doesn't sound too trite. Well, what I've learned is don't try and do everything yourself. And if you can find somebody who is expert in social media marketing, for example, hire them. I mean, the trouble with the online industry is it's a black art, and there's lots and lots of companies that make lots of claims about how they can up your traffic and up your conversion rates, and they've got the databases, and a lot of it doesn't work, and they take your money and you've paid them for 6 months and you haven't got the traffic and you haven't sold any paintings, and you think, could have spent money doing something else. So I think it's back to what I was saying a bit earlier. Look at what someone else is doing that you admire, that you think is successful, and try and find out who they're using and steal their ideas. Many years ago, David Ogilvy, who was a famous ad guy, said, if you want to hire an advertising agency, what you should do is make a note of the ads that you really like, find out who made them, and go and hire them. I think that's pretty good advice. And I think if you're running a gallery, that's what you should do.
And Amanda, be interested to know, obviously you probably haven't got the time to dive into it here, but what are you doing at the moment to drive traffic? If you've got one-off pieces of art and ceramics as well, what are you doing to tell those stories online about those one-off pieces? Each piece is going to have its own story at the end of the day, aren't they, if they're not replicable? So for me, are you doing video like we are now? Have you got a vlog or anything like that? Are you using Instagram TV, Instagram stories, YouTube? Are you using a podcast, for example, which is my passion to interview the artists that you've got there? What are your competitors doing in your space? Just like exactly what David said, and double down on what they're doing well and look at what they're not doing. What spaces have they not got a land grab on at the moment? If that's video technology, if that's podcasting, could you do? He said you've got an online presence. Are you doing some kind of online events where people can see the artwork and can speak to the artist? That's just brainstorm from me on that, leading off of David's suggestion on there as well. So Chris says, Amanda, there is a website called People Per Hour, which can link you to some brilliant professionals. Yeah, I've used that myself, who can help you with social media as well. Amanda says, that's great. Thank you. You're welcome. Justine says again, David, did you go running this morning? And how important is your own fitness to business success? I was chatting to David about his running before we came online, because I did my first 10 miles on Sunday, my first ever 10 miles. And I can still hardly move, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah, David, how important is fitness to business success, and how much? That's a good question. And how much do you still do these days yourself?
Well, I came to fitness sort of 20 years ago, really, and the answer is I don't do as much as some people, but for me it's a sort of KPI. Isn't that sad?
Yeah,
it's a KPI. I can tell you exactly what I do. I do 3 days of weight training, and I do 3 days of running, and I have 1 day off. And I build my running up across the week. So I do 3 miles on Wednesdays, 4 miles on Fridays, and 10 miles on Sundays. And then I have Monday off, and I do other stuff in between. Someone said that if you could take the benefit of running and put it in a pill, people wouldn't ever need anything else. That would be enough. But I do think for mental health there is no substitute for exercise and getting a bit breathless and getting a bit tired through it. And I think that for lots of people, they don't look forward to it. They find it really hard, and they're really glad when it's over, right? And I can just tell you that from my experience, it's always really, really hard. The first 200 meters are horrible, but if you get through it, you get to the point where you don't feel normal if you don't exercise. And I know so many people who have moved from that place of hating it to now having to do it. I think it's, I could drone on about it for ages. I love it.
No, we talked about this before. I said I only discovered running, a year ago, last May, and I hated it my entire adult life. Kind of going back to the cross country in school, and now I'm completely addicted to it. Run 6 out of 7 days a week. And again, for me, it's just that I have my best thoughts while I'm running. It's that escapism, and I'm just on a high for literally 48 hours after I've done a decent run. So I thoroughly recommend it as well. Amanda's come back to us. She says, we sell for the artists. I love the idea of film, podcast, and contacting the artist to discuss, though. We need to be more virtual. Yeah, thanks for all the ideas so far. Martin says, for the gallery, can you artists in a niche sell via your site for a commission? That's a good question as well. Okay. Any advice as we're kind of finishing off now? I just noticed the time, David. Any advice what people should be focusing on? And then you obviously on the board for a number of companies yourself. What are you advising people to focus on over the next 4 weeks? Like in theory, we're still in lockdown for what, at least another 2 weeks, but we're all kind of expecting it to be another 3, if not longer. What's your advice? Next 4 weeks, what should be the top of people's priority lists?
Cash, costs, cash without question. Always start with the cash. Back to what I was saying right at the very beginning, you have a responsibility to understand the cash. Secondly, I think you should focus on your customers. This is not a time to think, well, they don't want to hear from me. They're probably in a bit of a crisis. It's all a bit difficult. Now is the time for communication. Okay. And I think that you really need to be there for your customers, and you need to converse with them, even if it's not easy. It's what you need. It's what you need to do, because if you don't do it, someone else will be doing it, and the world will be just as competitive when we come out of it. And so now you need to be doing that. And I think about what you're offering people, how it can change. Start to have those team discussions, which I think will be very positive to have. Okay, guys, we're here. We survived. How are we going to thrive?
Thanks, Justine, for putting that in words for us. Focus on cash, cost, and customers, the 3 C's. Perfect advice. Very good. Any last question while we're here? Otherwise, David, any kind of closing thoughts from you? We're going to send an email, obviously, aren't we, with some links to people?
No, I'm just really grateful that people give me an hour of their time to do that. I've really enjoyed it, and if I can help anybody, just get in touch. There's lots of different ways to do that. LinkedIn, my website. We've got a couple of complimentary chapters from the book. So when your email goes out, Alex, it'll be obvious how you can have those.
Yeah.
I wanted to give you the book for nothing, but I was told by my publisher I couldn't do that.
Not allowed.
So it's available on the Kindle version. I think it's about £2 or something on Amazon, and there's also a link where you can go to Alison Jones, who's my publisher, and buy the book at a discounted price. And I hope that it would more than pay for itself. So yeah, I'm just grateful for everyone who's joined in. I think it's been a good community discussion, and thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's really enjoyable. Apologies for disappearing, courtesy of Virgin Media halfway through, but I managed to get myself back online, which has been, everybody being nimble and agile at these times, and everybody, even my 80-year-old mother, learning new technology. She keeps telling me an entire month doing that. So it's been great. We've had a really, really good audience on here. Jim says the book is worth the full value. Thank you, Jim. Lots of thank yous coming in from people. Last question that's come in. I don't know if you've got 1 minute, David. Nick says there will be the opportunity for some opportunistic acquisitions post-lockdown. True. What's the number one priority when considering a deal? This would be a sweet spot for you, I'd imagine, David. Price, people, strategy?
Okay. Well, the first thing you should consider is that in a deal, most of the value goes to the seller. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the person who's buying, generally speaking, doesn't get the benefit of the synergies that they thought they would. They don't have the cross-selling opportunities that they thought they'd get. And they fall in love with the idea of acquiring a company. So if you're going to go and buy a company, make sure you have good advice. And to be honest, that's very difficult, because if you're using a middleman, they don't really care whether it's a great deal, because they just want to get paid. So I would say proceed with caution. Do your due diligence really carefully. So when you're looking at their customer base, you know, what are those contracts like? What is the competition likely to do? Do not underestimate the challenge of integrating a new business. I did. When I was at Capital, we bought GWR Group. We used Deloitte as our advisors, and they were great. They were really good. They made all the numbers work, but actually the cultural differences really were the undoing of that deal. So proceed with caution, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Just be really careful.
That's great. Appreciate you taking extra time to answer that one, David. That's great. And hopefully haven't missed out any questions there. We certainly had a whole load. I'm sure we could keep going, but really good turnout. Really appreciate David taking the time out to share his thoughts and give you some strategies and some advice on what you can literally plug into your business today or tomorrow. So I'll be sending an email straight away to everybody with some links, as David said. So lots of thank yous coming in. If you'd like to join us again, I'm hosting a couple of these every day. Tomorrow, I'm hosting my friend Jonathan Bowman Perks, who's talking leadership. I'm hosting one at 12 o'clock on using podcasting as part of your marketing strategy. So Amanda, more than welcome to join me on that one. Lots of thank yous. Kieran, Karina, Wayne, Chris, Edward, Tess, Hazem, Gareth, Tom, Miss, Jim. Boom. I could go on. Loads of thank yous. So thank you all very much indeed. Thank you, David, for your time. And I'll speak to you again. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.